Hello, and welcome to today's webinar featuring the latest in TimberScan with Embedded Pay. Our presenter today is Mike Carbonneau from Core Associates, an Avid Exchange company. A few notes before we get started. Everyone is muted for a clean listening experience. If you have questions, please type them into the questions box and we will address them at the end of the session. For the best visual experience, please maximize your screen. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be emailed out to everybody later on today. I will now turn it over to you, Mike.
Okay, Krista, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's an exciting time for anyone that's currently using TimberScan, or if you're not using TimberScan. We hope that the enhancements that we've made recently will encourage you to kind of proceed in that direction. So today we're going to talk about TimberScan with Embedded Pay. So many of you are probably familiar with the fact that at the end of last year, Avid Exchange purchased Core Associates. And what has happened since then is we have basically created what we call a best of breed software solution. We've taken the best of breed, which is TimberScan, using the AP routing and approval process that's built into TimberScan, and all of that stays the same. That will continue to be, something that the industry will use for years and years to come, and will continue to be incredibly successful for allowing you to be able to take invoices and route them out to approvers and what have you. What we've also done on the other end, however, is we've solved what at Core Associates we were trying to accomplish for the last several years, which is to create a complete purchase to pay experience. And that's something we're going to talk about this morning at the beginning of the presentation. And then when I get into the demonstration, you'll understand what we mean by purchase to pay. So what we have been trying to accomplish with TimberScan for the past several years is to allow for everything from the initial purchase through the invoice routing and approval process to the payment process to be all managed from within one system, all managed from within TimberScan, and also allowing for the opportunity for everything to be done electronically, meaning that you never have to touch a piece of paper all along the way. So those are the things that we're going to be covering today. I know that we have a mix of clients that are viewing today's presentation. We have some companies that are currently using TimberScan. We have other companies that are not yet TimberScan clients. I'm not going to go into any type of full-fledged demonstration on TimberScan from an AP routing and approval perspective. I'll cover that in a bit of a highlight, a little bit of an overview, but I'm not going to go too deeply into that. If you're not currently using TimberScan, I would encourage you to reach out to Krista, the folks at Accord & Company, schedule a presentation. We'd be happy to show you TimberScan in depth. What we will focus on from a demonstration perspective is that last piece of the puzzle, which is the embedded pay experience. So with that, I'm going to walk through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. It won't take very long, and then we'll get into the application. So what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be reviewing what we call the purchase to pay process. We'll be diving into the software, and then we're going to dig into automated payments and how you can maintain control while getting your vendors paid quickly and securely. This is an interesting stat. So recently there was a survey done, and the question was asked of CFOs throughout the construction industry whether or not they plan to digitize their AP or AR accounting functions. And 96% said that they have plans to digitize AP and or AR within the next year. So the trend is, it's already here. Again, it's undeniable. Everyone is aware of the fact that in order to become more efficient, we have to get the accounts payable workflow process under control. We have to be able to take invoices, find ways to efficiently get them in quickly, get them processed, get them out to approvers, but also get them paid as well. So this is what we're going to be covering today. And it's just interesting that, everyone is joining the revolution, if you will. So from here, what we want to do, I want to just take a couple of minutes and just review the purchase to pay process. And really what the end in mind is for the customer to have one place to retrieve all information around an accounts payable transaction. So you can do this seamlessly with the integration between, as we talked about, best of breed software. What's the first step in the process? It's what did we purchase? So that purchase could have been made a number of different ways. For some of you, you may be creating purchase orders in Sage 300. You might be creating commitments in Sage 300. For others, you may be using the TimberScan purchasing application. Still others might be writing purchase orders manually. Regardless of how that purchase order is created, TimberScan has the ability to be able to manage against that purchase order. So when we're entering an invoice in TimberScan, we can match it against the commitment, manage against that particular purchase, regardless of how it was created. So we start by looking at what we purchased. Secondly, we look at what did we receive. So we purchased something. Did we receive the number of goods that we were created on the purchase order? Those two things go hand in hand. Obviously, purchase order, receiver matched against the invoice, which is step 3. What were we billed? So now we're looking at what did we purchase? What did we receive? How was what was the billing process? Who approved the billing? Now we're getting into the workflow. Now we're talking about when the invoice comes in and gets processed and gets sent out for approval, who actually did that approval? How was it costed? Was it charged to a particular job, cost code, category, general ledger account code? All of those things come into play, and we want to have one place to be able to understand all of that information. But then we get to the steps of what happens after the approval is done. So what's the payment status? Has that invoice been paid? Has the vendor been paid yet? And how quickly can we go and we can determine how the vendor was paid? And finally, again, how was it paid? Was it paid using a check? Was it some sort of an electronic payment? Maybe a virtual card? All of those things come into play, and those are things that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes when we actually go into and look at the embedded pay experience that's inside TimberScan. So what we're doing here is we've created the only complete purchase to pay solution in the construction industry. With what we've built over the last several months, we now have accomplished what we've been trying to accomplish for the past several years, which is managing everything from the purchase through the payment process. What does this do? Well, first of all, it allows us to have visibility of everything from the purchase order through the accounts payable invoices through the payments. It makes it simple. It's easy to track down invoices and payments and what have you, rather than having to dig through a filing cabinet or look through the Windows file system to be able to try and dig up this information. It's all available to us in one place, and it's easily accessible, and we can compile that data very quickly and easily. And talking about quickly, obviously, speed is involved. So we can approve invoices and also approve payments more quickly through this method of having everything in one place. Centralization, talking about having it in one place. One repository where we can go for the purchase order, invoices, and payments, and be able to pull that information up very quickly and very easily. And control. So from the accounts payable perspective, when using TimberScan, obviously we have control over that workflow process. We determine who's going to be getting those invoices for approval. We can control, instead of the scenario where an invoice gets passed to someone and maybe we have no idea when they got it, how long they've had it, when they're going to be able to approve that invoice. When you're using TimberScan, you know all of that information. you can quickly access that invoice and you can determine when, for example, the project manager received it. And you can also send alerts to let them know that we need to get this invoice approved for the purposes of taking advantage of discounts or whatever it might be. But the other side of this is the payment process. So there's a question, there's a concern that, I know some folks think if we allow for some sort of an electronic payment, then we're going to lose control, that we're going to basically not have the ability to handle that check and be able to look at the check and see the invoice associated with that check, and then be able to kind of manage that and approve it, when we want to release those funds. That's not the case. What we built inside TimberScan now does give you that control. It gives you the ability to be able to manage the payment process the same way that you can manage the invoice routing and approval process. So basically, if you look at this from a high level scenario, again, workflowing this out, we're talking about the process beginning when the purchase order is created. And again, it doesn't matter where that purchase order was created. TimberScan has the ability to manage against that particular purchase, whether it was a purchase order created in Sage 300, a purchase order that was created in TimberScan, maybe it was created manually, maybe you didn't create a purchase order. But regardless, TimberScan takes the invoice, manages that invoice, and it can manage the invoice against the purchase. Once that workflow process of sending the invoice off to the approver is done and the approvals have been completed, that information gets then transmitted to your ERP. In this case, we're referring to Sage 300 CRE. But I think it's also important to note that TimberScan, there's also we'll call it a version of TimberScan, which we refer to as TimberScan Titanium, that is available for other applications such as Sage 100 and Sage Intact. So we've built a solution if for example, you happen to be thinking that, we're currently using Sage 300, we're using TimberScan, but we're, considering at some point, perhaps looking at Intact down the road, just know that TimberScan has a solution for Intact as well. With that said, we've processed the purchase order, managed the invoices, that information updates Sage 300, and then the final step is release of the funds, managing that payment process. And that's where what we've done is we've taken that control of that. Even though you're still starting that particular process inside Sage 300 like you always would, TimberScan now has the ability to manage that and optimize the payment process using the Avid Pay network. Okay, so just basically kind of pulling this all together, we're going to get into the software in just a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to show one final slide. So if you look here at the process as it probably exists today with printing checks, there are basically 10 steps that we've highlighted here that typically would take place in we'll call it a check printing process. So we go through the bill selection. We actually print the checks out of Sage 300, prepare the checks signed. Checks have to be mailed, so they have to be put in envelopes and what have you. They have to be mailed out. They have to be, a copy of the check is filed. The payment is received. We do a pay inquiry. We're trying to match the payment information. We're doing follow-up. We're doing reconciliation. So basically a 10-step process. What I want to do is I want to spend a few minutes showing you a method that I think makes this so much more efficient and can be so much more beneficial on a number of different levels. So with that, I'm going to break out of the PowerPoint. And we are going to jump into the software. So I'm just going to bring up TimberScan for a moment. I'm not actually going to go through any type of a full-fledged demonstration of TimberScan, but just wanted to talk about the workflow process. So let's just say we're going to start with a purchase, and regardless of, again, where that purchase order was created. What happens is the invoice arrives at our door. To get the invoice into TimberScan, we choose the acquire function. Now, my suggestion would be, if at all possible, use the email monitoring program inside TimberScan. It's available to you. It's part of the system. It doesn't cost you anything extra. But what it will do is it will allow you to take the invoices from an email, drop them into a file compiled automatically, and then you can just pull all of those invoices out of the file. So rather than having to constantly, for example, take an invoice that comes in the mail and having to put it on a scanning device, or having to drag and drop every single invoice into the system, you can simply come in, you can open up the file where the emailed invoices arrived, you grab that whole stack of invoices, you pull them into the viewer, and then you send them off for data entry at that point. So again, I would say, if you can at all possible, take advantage of the email monitoring. Have your vendors, have yourself send the invoices in by way of email so that you can quickly acquire them. There's no need for anyone to have to manually handle a piece of paper, and then you can send them off for data entry, and you can proceed forward from there. Second step in the process is the invoice entry step. In here, again, one of the things that I would recommend is, if you can, take advantage of TimberScan Capture, the OCR tool. Rather than going in and keying in all of the information associated with an invoice, you can simply set up a template for a vendor, like I've done here for HD Supply, and then pull in all of the information associated with that particular vendor's invoice. Notice everything, I put this invoice, everything, the invoice number, the date, the amount, the job that it was charged to. Hypothetically, as a data entry person, I could look at this invoice, go ahead and accept the invoice and send it off to the approvers. And at this point, if the invoice came in by way of email, it got dropped into my, basically into my queue. I look at it, I never touch the keyboard, I go ahead and accept it and send it off to the approvers. Basically, no one has touched a piece of paper at this point, and no one has had to do any data entry. And we've already got the invoice in the hands of the approver. The approval process, very straightforward, multiple levels of approval. You can do thresholds, all of those things. Once the invoices get approved, they get sent over to Sage 300 and they get posted in Sage 300. And that's where we're going to go next. So now we're going to talk about the invoices that have been updated in Sage 300. Now we're going to go through kind of, basically a typical check selection process. So let's go into Sage 300. I'm going to do like I always would. I'll choose the option print checks. And then what we'll do here is, instead of sending those particular payments out to an actual printer, what we would do is we're going to choose this option called print to Avid. What that will do is, basically the print to Avid function is a print driver. And what it does is it takes all of the data that you would normally be sending out to your physical printer, and it's going to compile that, and it's going to pull it into TimberScan, where you can manage it from within TimberScan. So we choose print to Avid. It goes ahead, and I'm just going to choose this, but we're not going to actually do it. But we say okay. It takes that data, compiles it, and it sends it over to TimberScan, which is where I'm going to go next. Okay, so from within TimberScan, I'm going to look at this in TimberScan Go, and we're going to walk through the process of being able to kind of manage and handle those payments. So what I did, remember, I just went into print checks. Instead of physically sending them out to a printer, I sent them to TimberScan, and then from within here, if I go into pay control, I can go in and I can choose to approve those particular payment transactions if I want. Now, in this case, I may have several transactions. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight this one transaction, and then we'll look at this from this perspective. So basically, once I choose the print to Avid function, it sends the data over to TimberScan, and this is what it looks like. So now what it did is it actually created what looks like a check. So this is what it would have sent out to the printer. It would have sent an actual check, but instead it creates that check image inside TimberScan. It has the check stub information here at the top, and then it has the invoice or invoices that that check is paying. So for anyone who thinks, I've got to be able to print these checks. I want to be able to see the check and the invoice in any of the supporting documents so that I can match all of that up together. You have it right here. And because of the fact that TimberScan Go is designed in a web browser, and it has a responsive user interface, you could do this anywhere. You could actually put this on your phone. So I could be on my phone, I could be walking around somewhere completely outside the office if need be, pull up this information, see the check, see the invoice that it's paying, and choose to go ahead and approve, put it on hold, or void it if I want. So there's no loss of control with this. It's simulating the step that you would normally do if you were actually sending this to a printer. But you don't now need to take that check and attach it to the invoice and all the supporting documents. So all of that laborious process of putting the check on top of the invoice and all the supporting documents goes away. It's all compiled for you and it's right here. So let's talk about the control buttons here at the top. So obviously, if I go ahead and approve this, basically what I'm doing is I'm releasing the funds. And I'll talk about what happens when we release the funds in a second. But you can also put these payment transactions on hold. So if I go back here for a second, I have some transactions that are on hold. I can go through and I can search those. And then I can just call those up. Same thing happens. So I call it up and it brings up the check image and it brings up the payment information. And then I can call up and I can look at any of the other transactions associated with this. So again, basically what we're talking about is, and again, if there were any supporting documents, I would see that as well. But let's talk about that hold method for just a second. Why would we want to put a payment on hold? Well, possibly maybe we're waiting for a lien waiver to be returned. Maybe there's an insurance issue that we're aware of, that maybe there's some insurances that are expired or what have you. So we are aware of that and we are not going to go ahead and release the funds until that compliance issue has been resolved. So this pay control system, the initial version of this that you're seeing now, we're going to be building upon this. And we're building a compliance management system inside of this pay control application for you to be able to use for things like lien waiver management and other things that would respond to some sort of a compliance issue. So that's where the hold comes into play. Now, TimberScan Go also has a notification system, and the notification system is being expanded to allow you to be able to use it for sending notifications for things like payment transactions that I may have put on hold. So maybe, I put some transactions on hold, but I have a notification that says it's going to alert me every couple of days or what have you to let me know, did we receive that lien waiver yet? So that I can go in and look, and if I have, I can just go ahead and I can approve it and release it from there. Finally, there's also the void function. So maybe there's a transaction that got to me as the approver, and I'm looking at this and I decide, you know what, I'm not going to go ahead and approve this one. We need to just go ahead and avoid it. So you void it, it sends that data back to Sage 300, and then you would void that particular transaction in Sage 300, and you'd have to reissue another payment. So pay control is kind of the first step in this process. Once you approve the payment, what it does is it releases the funds to the Avid Pay network. And then Avid Exchange goes through the process of working with your vendors and negotiates with them the method in which they want to be paid. So in some cases, it could be using a virtual card. In some cases, it could be using an electronic payment. And then in other cases, there may be some vendors that decide they still want to be paid by check. Avid takes care of all of that. Once you release the funds, you also transfer the liability over to Avid. So it's not like, some people are talking about, are concerned, something that's very important right now, check fraud. Well, if you have to maintain all of your vendor information on your server somewhere, that's something that could easily be hacked, and people could dig into that information. You transfer all of that liability. You don't have to maintain any of that information, and you don't have to worry about check fraud because you've transferred all of that responsibility over to Avid once you release these funds. Okay, so let's say we've done that and the payment has been made. What happens at that point? So now we want to look at this from the other perspective of seeing when, where, and how. So I'm going to go into the payment inquiry. And again, I have different options here. So if I wanted to kind of narrow my search, I could do this by bank account, by check number, by pay status, a number of different ways in which I can do this. Right now, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to run a search. Let's eliminate the filter screen at the top. And now I have all of my transactions in a format that kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet where I can see the check number, the bank, I can see what the status is, the entity, who the vendor is. I've got the vendor ID. I've got how the payment was made, if it was made, the dollar amount. I've got all of my detailed information right here in front of me. Now let's say maybe what I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and I'll create a filter. And we'll say, let's just look at all of our cleared transactions. So here's how quickly I can go access this information. So I've just pulled up all of my cleared transactions and I can go down this list, look at every single payment that was made, see how it was paid. I have all the information. You can see the different options here: virtual card, e-payment, Avid Pay check. As I kind of scroll down through these transactions, what you'll also notice is that there are some action buttons here on the left-hand side. What I can do here is I can call up the proof of payment record for that particular transaction. So again, we don't lose control of anything. We have all of this information, including the proof of payment, right here in front of us. And this proof of payment transaction, this record that you see here, is also being added to the TimberScan substantiated billings program. So for some of you that are using TimberScan, you're probably familiar with the job cost inquiry, where you could go in and you could do an inquiry, you could basically build a report that would allow you to attach invoices and supporting documents and payments to a time and material or cost plus billing or for a loan draw. Well, now this is being included in that as well. So I can now attach that this proof of payment record to that particular transaction. And of course, you can always download any of these transactions as well. So if I needed this to download and to use it, or maybe I need to, send this on to a particular vendor for whatever reason, I have the information available to me. I can just download it and send it off as I need to. So what we've accomplished is not only have we now allow you to manage the entire workflow process from the purchase through the AP workflow, but we're also allowing you to manage the entire payment process as well. It's all done within TimberScan with that one step of making your check selection in Sage 300 like you normally would, and then TimberScan takes over from there. And once you release the funds, everything goes out to the Avid Pay network, and your vendors are paid through the Avid Pay network. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and call back up the PowerPoint slide. And let's resume here from this slide. And I just want to bring this back up again. And if you remember, when we were talking about the kind of the print check option and the manual payment process, we had these 10 steps that were involved. Once you implement the new program, you do the print to Avid function, you use TimberScan, you've dropped those 10 steps down to 3. There's the bill selection, which is the print check option inside Sage 300. There's the electronic approval, which is done in TimberScan, the reconciliation. Nothing else needs to be done. We're not putting checks in envelopes, having to mail everything out, having to file copies. Everything is done and it's saved in TimberScan. So there's no need to have to send all that information off. So we've created this efficiency in this purchase to pay solution to allow for everything from the purchase through the payment method without ever having to touch a piece of paper all along the way. Okay, so there are a couple of slides that we built into the PowerPoint, which again are just a review. This is really talking about that print to Avid function that I went into in Sage 300. There's the slide talking, this is actually the payment inquiry that I went into last inside TimberScan, where I'm reviewing what happened to each of the transactions. It's all available to me in TimberScan. I've got it centralized. I can call it up and I can look for any of that information whenever I need it. So now let's talk about what is available to you with respect to this. Now, the first part of this, that embedded pay program that I demonstrated inside TimberScan, TimberScan Go, basically, that's all free. That's all part of that's basically just an enhancement to TimberScan that we've built. So all of that comes with this, basically with the system. But in order to set up the Avid Pay network, there are some things that are involved. So there is an implementation fee. It's $2,500. However, once you implement and you reach your 80% adoption, payment adoption has been achieved, we refund you that $2,500. So in essence, you can get the setup and implementation fee for nothing. Secondly, the way that the Avid Pay network works is that it's basically on a per transaction basis. And it's typically 89 cents per payment. Right now, we've reduced that to 55 cents per payment. So basically the cost of a stamp, which the stamps are going up. So very soon, this is going to be less than the cost of a stamp. And finally, the option and the ability to receive a credit for the number of payments that you put through the network. And something that's very exciting that we are just now announcing is that if you run a minimum of 100 payments through the network, you would receive up to a $2,000 credit on your TimberScan support. And that's what I wanted to go to next. So let me just, before I go to this next slide, let me just say that again. If you think about your TimberScan maintenance or subscription price right now, if your renewal is $2,000 or less, right now, through this promotion that we've developed and the incentive that we have for adopting the embedded pay program, you would get up to a $2,000 credit on your support. So basically, your support would be paid for by simply putting 100 payments through the network. Here's a couple of examples here. This is a little bit higher. So we're talking about if your support is 3,400 payments, we do that. This is actually slightly different now, but think of it this way. Depending on the number of payments that you're running through the network, we can look at your support agreement and we can determine whether or not we could potentially pay for your TimberScan support through this program. So you can have all of that credited back. And there's a possibility that the rebate that you might receive might exceed your TimberScan support. But that's something that you probably could look at first as, let's see what your TimberScan support is. Can we satisfy that first? And then we can look at where we might be able to go from there. And with that, Krista, I guess we will open it up for any questions.
Okay, great. If you do have questions, put them in the box. There are a couple here to start. The first question is can the payment only be done through TimberScan Go?
Yes. Right now, we built it into TimberScan Go. We did that for a couple of reasons. One of them is because we're designing this to be as mobile as possible. And if you think about the standard kind of classic TimberScan application, it's something that's run on your server. So you're not able to kind of mobilize that per se. But with TimberScan Go, because of the fact that it is a browser solution and it is has a responsive user interface, it allows it to be mobilized. So you could potentially process your payments using any type of mobile device. So that's why we built it into TimberScan Go. That's why we've kind of done it that way. So the answer is yes, it's in TimberScan Go. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but TimberScan Go is available to anyone that uses TimberScan. And it's free to anyone that uses TimberScan. There's no additional cost or nothing to use TimberScan Go. It's part of your application. It's basically a browser-based mobile application that's part of TimberScan.
Okay, our next question is, how long does it take Avid to make actual vendor payments?
They're done depending on when the payment is actually released from you, the client. Depends on when they get paid. I believe that if it is received after a certain point in the afternoon, perhaps like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then it's paid the next day. But it's done within 24 hours of release of funds.
Okay, next question is, can we process the AIA through TimberScan?
Yes, yeah, we have a lot of clients that process AIA, G702s, G703 documents through TimberScan. So yes, you can do it. And you can set up those G702, 703 documents in TimberScan Capture so that you can retrieve the information directly from the AIA billing document, yes.
Okay, next question is minimum payments for maintenance service credits using any form of payment or credit card payments only?
The minimum payments is for any type of payment process. So basically, what happens is that you're sending those payments to the network, and then Avid is working with your vendor, and Avid has thousands of vendors that are already in their network. So they already know, for example, that there are probably several of your vendors that they are working with that they already know that they would prefer to receive, for example, a virtual card, or they would prefer to receive an electronic payment, or what have you. So, yeah, there's no restriction. It's based on the vendor preference, and that's all worked through the Avid Pay network.
Okay, next one is, if a payment is made through Avid, does it show as paid in Sage 300?
Yes. Yeah, it's actually, it's going to show paid in Sage 300. When you process those payments, yes.
Okay, looks like that's, oh, one more question. How are payment errors addressed?
I'm sorry, what was that again, Krista?
How are payment errors addressed?
Payment errors. Okay, so a couple things. Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest way to correct the payment error is to actually void that transaction through the through the pay control system, sending the void back to to Sage 300 and void the transaction in Sage 300 and then start it over again.
Then do we have to use a credit card form if TimberScan is talking to the vendor? Isn't that the incentive for TimberScan?
Do you have to use a credit card form? Okay, I'm not sure if I understand, I'm going to answer this in two ways. If you're talking about the vendor receiving payment through
The form of, they're saying the form of payment.
right, so the form of payment could potentially be a virtual card. That's correct. That's something that's negotiated between Avid and the vendor. And if they will use a virtual card, that's not something that you have to worry about per se. It's not like you have to activate any type of a credit card or virtual card in order to make that work. That's all done between Avid and the vendor.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we have. Rapid fire is over. So if you do have other questions as you think of them, you can simply reply to the recording email that will be sent later on today or reach out to us directly. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great day, and we will talk to you all soon.
Yes, thank you again, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks, Krista.